Well then, still got a couple of DuckTales videos on my to-do list. Maybe another video on Dalmatian Street? Think about doing a video on Star Wars as the forces of evil as a whole. But in the meantime, let's go back to ponies. So, as it turns out, the DHX staff is capable of designing a deer. Yeah, I don't know about you, but I wasn't particularly happy with the reindeer we saw in the best gift ever. They just kinda look like ponies with antlers. The great seedling on the other paw fixes pretty much all problems I had with the reindeer designs by having a taller and more slender body, and they even highlighted the nose. In particular, the latter would fix the reindeer design immediately if you ask me. I mean, they still look fine, but it still kinda bothered me back then. So it is pretty cool to see a better take on a sentient deer this time around. Though of course this is somewhat undermined by the fact that the great seedling is just a mystical creature that may or may not exist. But yeah, it's still the closest thing to a Tyne dagger we have in the show now, so I take it. And now regarding the story, well, it is pretty standard. The whole character is hunting down a mystical creature only for it to turn out to be a hoax with a stinger that implies that it might exist after all, is a proven concept, and this episode does little new with it. And that's okay, it's a functional story frame and it's more about how the characters act in the scenario. And would you believe it, this might actually be my favorite Applejack outing in years. Yeah, you might remember that one video I did in which I explained why I don't really care for AJ anymore, as her stubborn attitude tends to be the source of conflict. It was rather refreshing to see that this wasn't the case this time around. Her stubbornness isn't forgotten. She is convinced that Gordy is behind all of this at first, and that Applejack shouldn't waste her time with childish games. But considering the circumstances, it was somewhat reasonable. And instead of making it worse by trying to prove that she is right, like she usually tends to do, she instead makes a deal with Applejack that they can hunt the seedling together after work, making an actual compromise, even though she still thought that it is a childish waste of time. This is the Applejack I was missing the last couple of seasons. Someone who is trying to do her best, who is stubborn but reasonable, trying to make her family happy, and not a work-obsessed perfectionist who always has to be right. Then we learn from Granny that AJ used to be as excited about the seedling hunt as Applejack, showing that they aren't that different, and it got even better once AJ is convinced that the seedling is real. Again, it was rather refreshing to see this somewhat childish and excited side of her. But more importantly, it was the first time we actually saw them bonding over something. Applejack is usually portrayed as idolizing her big sister, and they are supposed to have a very good relationship, but we actually see that rather rarely. Usually we see it in episodes like Sister Who's Social, to show how they have a far better relationship than Rarity and Sweetable, or in Brother Who's Social, where the point is that AJ is closer to Applejack than Big Mac. The episodes that are actually about the relationship usually deal with Applejack being unhappy because AJ keeps patronizing her, which goes way back to Brittle Gossip. So yeah, they only have a good time together when MLP needs to show a working sibling relationship and to highlight the flaws in another. That's why I think it's pretty great to see them bonding like that and have an actual episode devoted to them just having some fun together for once. I also rather enjoyed to see Goldie Delicious again. She was a fun character and she was just the right person to kick off the conflict, with her insistence that the seedling is real. Not much else to say about her, just kinda fun to see her again. Though I know what you guys are actually excited about. We got to see Peer Brother and Brightmac again. Well, it was only a silent flashback cameo, but it was raw sweet nonetheless. And hey, we finally got to see them interact with their children at least. For a bit, even with baby Applejack. Though again, I have to question the timeline. We saw Applejack as a baby back in Sparkle 7, but AJ and Big Mac were noticeably older in comparison to Applejack in that flashback. Okay, I know that flashback was most likely fake, but I don't really see a reason why AJ would age Applejack down. Or maybe ponies really do age very slowly, which would explain why Flurry Heart is still a baby at this point. Besides that, the whole story about the Great Seedling reminded me of one of the very early MLP comics, Microcomic number 6 to be precise, which dealt with the Apple family hunting down a different magical creature, the Sasquatch. I don't want to spend too much time wasting on it, but I think it is worthy of a comparison. Short summary, everyone is busy to get the harvesting done in time for Housewarming Eve, and especially AJ is of course caught up in her work. Then the Sasquatch messes with the harvest and AJ vows to capture it, refusing the help of her family at first, only to fail. Finally, she accepts that she cannot do it on her own, and AJ, Applebloom and Big Mac manage to capture it. Then it is revealed that it was actually Granny Smith in disguise, and that it was all a ploy to remind them that it is more important to spend time with their family than to be obsessed with work. So in a way, Granny did in the comic what AJ thought Goldie Delicious was doing in this episode. Also, the Sasquatch hunt was a ploy to get the family together. The hunt for the Great Seedling had a rather similar effect, as it strengthens the bond between AJ and Applebloom. This is, by the way, also the lesson of this episode. Sure, doing your work is important, but spending time with your family and having fun together is just as important. It is a very sweet lesson to be sure, and certainly something AJ herself should take to heart, looking at you, Applejack, stay off. So yeah, I thought it was rather interesting to see that both the show and the comic not only take it as a similar story, but also use it to teach the same lesson. It always kinda amuses me to compare the two and to see which one did it better. No, which did. At face value, both are fine, but I do prefer this episode. Overall, the comic is just kinda mediocre. Also, it puts more emphasis on AJ's stubbornness, which I got rather tired of by now. I slightly prefer the ending of the comic though. While Granny tricking her family to teach them a lesson is a bit cliché, I think it is somewhat less contrived than Big Mac sleepwalking and doing all the work by himself. Also, the comics also reveal at the end that the Sasquatch was actually real all along, and I'm not talking about a last panel reveal that everyone is thinking he was fake. Nope, the Sasquatch messed with the harvest on Granny's request, and she only pretended later on that he was fake, which was a mildly interesting twist. The episode on the other paw only hints at the Great Seedling might exist, but it is never quite confirmed. Frankly, I would have preferred to see the Seedling walk away at the end, giving us some confirmation on that front. And with that being said, let's wrap things up. Overall, I think Going to Seed is a decent episode. It had some funny moments here and there, and I liked AJ's and Applebloom's interactions. And there isn't really anything wrong with this episode either. It was a pretty safe one actually. The plot is rather standard, so there was a little mess up, but that's kinda it. I think there's little that makes this episode special. It is kinda par for the course. Better than average, I give it that, but frankly the only reason why I decided to do a video on it was because I finally had to say something nice about Applejack again. Well, and I wanted to point out that I really like the design for the Great Seedling. But what about you? Did you like this episode? Anything that bothered you? What are your thoughts on the Great Seedling? Let me know in the comments below. I am Tricky Fox. Stay foxy.
Sly as a fox, you got me under your spell. But you know I'll never tell that I know you know so well. Some